Lair is an intensely deep and emotional game, a modern day epic which takes the player on an unbelievable... I'm just kidding, of course. Well, sorta. You see, there's a bunch of things to say about Lair, and about half of them are good. Very good, in fact. So without any further ado, here's a long overdue retrospective of Lair. By the way, full spoilers ahead. You could write a book about Lair. It's a story of really smart people who, because of circumstance, put something together that didn't quite turn out as successful as you think it would for how much talent was on that team and how much money we spent, said Lair level designer Mark Wilhelm in an interview with Polygon. I think Wilhelm is right here. Lair is a 2007 PlayStation 3 exclusive where you assume the role of a dragon rider fighting in a bitter war between two nations in a hostile world where resources are ever shrinking and where a religious leader maneuvers to create a theocracy out of a thriving society. You take part in massive battles, taking out catapults, burning enemy soldiers to a crisp, and tripping up AT-ATs. Sounds pretty cool, right? The good part is that Lair is often incredibly epic. It released about a year after the PlayStation 3's release and looked, if not beautiful, then at least very good for its time. I remember being blown away by the scale of the levels and the Lord of the Rings style battles you can take part in, as one unit in a field of thousands of troops. I mean, look at this. The epicness of it all. Just look at the dragon flapping its wings. The sense of speed and motion, everything else going on in the scene. Oh, it's so good. And if that wasn't enough, the music in this game was absolutely phenomenal, and it still is. Just listen to how the main menu greets you. And the most epic battle in the game, the Siege of Mokai, playing to the tune of Firestorm. It's as if someone took the best from the Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and said, Lair would be a good place for this. Damn, that's just so good! You go from being the zealous kind of brash special soldier in the Skyguard to witnessing a betrayal from one of your own where two leaders are killed in what was supposed to be a peace meeting, to going full ethnic cleanser, realizing you're on the wrong side, so you join the other side in an attempt to take down the theocratic fanatic government which now threatens the world and you once helped rise to power. I'm not saying it's some extremely original story or anything, but for what's there and the way the soundtrack is used, it really manages to create an emotional situation. One I'd like to compare, if not in execution, then at least in theory, to Star Wars and the Order 66 moment where the bad guys kind of win. The way you steer the dragon, although not perfect, is kinda revolutionary. Lair was made to be played with the PlayStation 3 controller known as the 6-axis, which had a built-in motion controller. The way you turn your controller also controls where your dragon flies, and despite a few annoying gestures, the general movement actually works really well, at least after the patches came out. And speaking of patches, I guess this is a good place to talk about what went wrong with Lair. You see, the fact that there is no Lair 2 is a testament to the fact that Lair ended up being kind of a massive mess. In the game's own included developer diaries and features, Factor 5's Julian Egebreth, who was creative director on Lair, shared that the team was very skeptical to using the motion controller instead of the analog sticks.
After the first day, where everybody was extremely skeptical,
Brian Kruger states that it's very intuitive and fun.
It's very intuitive and it's really fun.
Yet the Polygon article reveals that all of the designers were unanimous that we didn't like the motion controls and it wasn't how the game was meant to be played. We ended up shipping it that way and none of us were happy, according to designer Joe Spataro. Apparently, Sony had all but forced Factor 5 to ship Lair only with motion controls, despite a day 1 patch enabling analog stick gameplay. But that patch was allegedly held back by Sony for the better part of a year. It must be said that Phil Harrison, former executive vice president of Sony Europe, denied that the use of motion controls was mandated and decided by Sony. Without having been in the decision-making room, I do, however, believe it seems strange that a company would deliberately ship with only one way of using the controls when the traditional way of using them is available. Especially when, according to the Lair team itself, the announcement of the 6-axis controller made them go, "Oh no, Sony is going to push this new technology on our game," or as they said it themselves, "Shit, Sony is going to make us use this." I think this sentiment is reflected in the game. The main gameplay works quite well actually, with the flying feeling largely natural. It is when small quick-time events happen that things really suffers, and when the game forces you to move things up and down or left or right. It really hampers the sense of dynamism and fun, and just plain sucks to be honest. Taking out catapults by jerking the controller is fun only for a few seconds or so, after which it just becomes a bore. The same goes for much of the precision in the game. You're gonna crash into walls, get stuck under a mantis wing, and one of the main things you'll be doing in Lair is shooting down towers and other dragons, and luckily there's both a lock-on function and a form of auto-aim where if a target is in range and in your field of view, most of your shots will probably land. It doesn't feel as good as other flying games, but it does its job and makes for some epic moments. In theory, the massive battles in Lair is a tug of war between two sides. The developers were eager to highlight that every battle has a moral meter where the armies themselves influence the tide of battle, and that you are just one guy and one dragon in this massive battle. While it's true in theory, everything depends on you, and your army is either likely or guaranteed to lose if you're not at your best. In practice, the moral meter is more or less a sort of timer you need to keep alive if you want to win, and you do so by killing the enemy and taking out their war beasts. There are a lot of these levels in Lair, and when I say a lot of levels, I certainly don't mean that Lair sports a lot of levels. There are in fact only about 14 different levels, not counting the tutorial, and if I'm not mistaken, at least 2 or 3 of these are repeated at least once. When I played the game again to record this video, I finished the game in about 5 hours, every level taking roughly 20 minutes to complete. And that's not a whole lot, especially for a title of this scope. Lair not only suffers from short playtime, janky controls, and repetitive gameplay, but the game itself is horribly unoptimized with a frame rate that can only be classified as F tier, and something I would not have been able to play if I didn't already have a sense of love for the game. Oh, and don't get me started on the absolutely terrible boss battles, where all you're doing is basically messing up quicktime events and flying after other massive beasts who act more or less as fire sponges. The fact that Lair has no true memorable characters are reflected in these uninspired boss battles. Lair was mired in development issues and delays, and the biggest example of this might be that Lair was initially called Dragon Knight, with the initial game idea being a lot more ambitious than what Lair would become. Dragon Knight was supposed to portray this epic war between two religious factions, based on the Middle East and the post-9/11 thought of either you're with us or you're against us mantra of the United States, in what was going to be an anti-war story. It was supposed to feature an open world with the player as a mercenary, but apparently Sony was afraid of portraying a religious conflict in an open world, so what we got instead was Lair. But the biggest issue was most likely that when Factor 5 began developing their game for PlayStation 3, they tossed out all of their old tools, effectively being forced to rewrite them from scratch. This was apparently done because the team thought the PlayStation 3 signaled a shift in how games were designed, and as the creative director told Polygon, that, quite frankly, was the single biggest mistake throughout Lair's whole development. Not only did we have this completely new system to learn, but we also had no base technology. That was a fundamental, really bad mistake that we made, and Sony had absolutely nothing to do with that. It was our own stupidity. In addition, the team's belief in the power of the PlayStation 3 would end up messing with reality. Lair's rough frame rate came out of the idea that the team thought they wouldn't have to optimize anything. Later, the creative director admitted to Polygon that you should never believe the hype from the hardware manufacturers. Very big mistake. And so, Lair became a project mired in delays, unmet expectations from both developer and consumer, and more or less a forgotten IP that could have been so much more. It's almost sad watching and listening to what the developers have to say about the game themselves before it came out, because you can really tell that they wanted to tell a complex story with several layers. Yet the game was never able to show these aspects off in any other way than surface level, and 5 hours of gameplay gives no time to tell a complex story of this size either. Despite the many flaws though, I really do think Lair deserves a sequel with all the polish and depth the first one should have had. By all measures, Lair is a game I really shouldn't like. The graphics have not aged particularly well, it's repetitive, too short for its own good, and with fairly shallow characters. Yet I cannot deny that the first sense of awe I felt back in 2008 when I first played it still remains to some degree. Lair is unique in its handling of a massive flying beast, and that sense of gameplay, in most cases, is still present. One cannot forget the awe-inspiring soundtrack as well, which does much to elevate everything Lair does and tries to accomplish. Lair sure is one heck of an unpolished gem, but something of a gem nonetheless. Thank you so much for taking the time to watch the video, guys. I really appreciate it. Please like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed it, and I hope to see you next time. Cheers.